What's up, YouTube? So this is part 2 to the last video. It's going to be cut from the same cloth, but it's going to deviate just a little bit. Last time we talked about how, you shouldn't measure yourself according to other people's standards, and about, in particular, how guys should not allow the different versions of success and the metrics and whatnot of the world as it is become more so feminized to allow the world around them to create a framework that they measure themselves by, that they live by, that they define the patterns and goals and whatnot in their life by. This time I want to take a similar approach. These kind of conversations don't happen. This kind of information is not really out there, and I just want to provide this unique perspective that I think can empower people. And this is a bit of information that I think that a lot of people get wrong or either misinformed or uninformed about. So back to the whole idea of not measuring yourself up against and defining your success or chasing the goals of women or a feminine world. Similarly, the older generation is also vastly different from us. I kind of see this whole idea of the older generation sort of turning their nose up at the younger generation. Like, we're homeowners and, we did this when we were young and we did things by hand instead of paying people to do it. And by the time I was your age, I had already had 2 jobs and all this other stuff. Like the different ways that the different generations compare themselves to one another, especially the older generation to basically the millennials and Gen Z. It's kind of that split right there. How much the world has changed over those years has sort of created a divide between us. And that's basically what I want to highlight. If you go back and look at, the older generation, you're talking about people who had like a completely different kind of economy, a completely different kind of world, not just job opportunities, but the education standard was different. I mean, you could get by on a GED. You could like have a real solid, good life for you with just a GED. You have a high school diploma and you can have, a house and afford to provide for a family and not really need any additional formal education or training or skills or anything like that. And that's just one small facet of the economy. We talk about the entire environment in general, even aside from the educational system and the economy, additionally, even the nutrition was different. I mean, they didn't understand the harm of trans fats. They thought that drinking milk gave you strong bones. It goes on and on. The misconceptions about health and how they ate, their diet, how they viewed exercise, how they viewed work-life balances. I mean, there's so much has changed just in a mental, sort of psychological, cultural perspective. But in addition to that, you also have so many changes that have revolutionized the world as we know it today. Just to name a few, we've got the internet, artificial intelligence, social media, cell phones, microchips with the advance in nanotechnology has all completely transformed the world over years to create the environment that we have today. And so that highlights my next point. What I want to get at is you can't really compare yourself to this older generation, and they can't really compare themselves to us. I mean, you can, but it's really false equivalence, false comparisons. We're living in 2 completely different worlds. If we're living in 2 completely different worlds, then we have different starting points. Then we should have different goals. You can't say, oh, well, it's so difficult for us to own a home, so we're a failure. By their metrics, if we lived in their time period under their parameters and you were not able to make it up to the point of, let's say, for example, for a rudimentary example, to own a home in that scenario, then yeah, maybe you'd be a failure. But in today's world, to own a home at such a young age like they did would be an incredible feat. To have a family under some of the conditions that we have today would be a rarity. I mean, like statistically speaking, it's rare to both have a home and a family by a certain age today. Whereas if you didn't have a family and a house by a certain age back then you would have been an anomaly, right? You see what I'm saying? So success shouldn't be the same. And why people in general feel like, hey, we're failures, and when you compare yourself to the older generation, and why they can look at so much of what we do and scoff at it and make it like they're so much better than us, is because you're making a false comparison. If we were to look back at it today and similarly, like you'll see some of these older people out in the world today and they look like a fish out of water. They look like a dinosaur out here in the world because the perspectives and the framework that they have on the world just doesn't fit what the modern day is really about and what it really values and what it's really chasing after. And similarly, if you're living in today's modern world and you're judging yourself and your life and your accomplishments by an old framework, you're effectively, operating on an outdated software. This is going to keep you unhappy because you're going to keep feeling like you're a failure because you're working against the grain, trying to appeal to a time period that is literally in the past. So, look at it from the perspective of, well, today you can have a business, you can create a business easier than you ever could have in the past. You can connect to thousands of people. Like, you can literally become famous, or at least internet famous, whatever you want to call that. But you can become a well-known person today. Anybody can. Back in the day, you couldn't do that. You could drive like a 250, 300 horsepower car back in the day, and you would have had one of the meanest things on the road. Nowadays, it's nothing to go find a car that has 400 horsepower. I'm just trying to highlight the disparity in between these two time periods, and we have a different culture now. And I want to highlight this because we're living in an era unlike any other. We have advantages and resources and opportunities unlike any other. You think about like the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, how vastly different they were, but they were all great in their own way. And I just feel like the modern day, generation is falling short of its potential to make a cultural impact. Like, what defines us? The older generation and the news and all these different cliches about our generation, is that what defines us? Or do we define us? Does the way that we press things forward, does the mark that we leave on this earth define us, right? I'm tired of the opposition to positive momentum being there as opposed to people being a positive catalyst. I'm tired of the divisiveness causing friction towards us trying to gain momentum towards greatness. I'm tired of all of the self-inflicted damage, the dragging of our feet, the lack of enthusiasm, the lack of liveliness that is so prevalent in our demographic, like this term doomers. And I understand, like, trust me, I totally understand getting depressed. But what I'm getting at is, like, everything's advanced. We have an opportunity not just to be great, but to be better than ever before. We have the opportunity to put everything else to shame. Traveling internationally is easier than it's ever been. Traveling in general is faster and more efficient than it's ever been. And we're falling short of our potential, like, largely. I see this sort of prude, bashful behavior between genders, but even amongst the same gender, just in terms of being out in public and making friends or really failing to make friends. I remember a time period, even in my own life, and I'm not that old, when, the energy was just different. Like, everything was so much more impactful, and it's lost. And we totally have it within our power to reclaim it now. It just takes having some liveliness, some charisma, and not looking down on this in such a negative way as if we're failures in every regard. It's not the case. We live in a totally new world. We're unlike any other. And nobody can tell us what we are or we aren't, because we haven't shown them what we are yet. Anyways, I'm going to cut this one short. I'm going to put out another video that's not going to be related to this one. If you guys want more information that's from this similar line of thinking and want to dive into any of these topics deeper, comment section. Give me some feedback. Let me know what you guys are looking for. Let me know what you guys need help on. I'm going to put out more fun content. That's the plan for the next video. Just going to be me goofing around and just having fun. So stay tuned for that. That's going to come up next week. I'm going to be dropping these weekly every Friday. That's the plan. I will see you guys then.